Bible Alive, Bible Basics, class number 1, All Translations Are Betrayals, part 2. The following presentation would be impossible without these resources, especially 101 Questions and Answers on the Bible by Father Raymond E. Brown. Let's continue. Which translations do biblical scholars recommend? Scholars like the late Raymond Brown work with literal translations more than with free. This is because they teach and because they want their students to be aware of the problems in the scriptural text. Brown himself recommended 5 translations that he thought can be used with profit. In the late 1980s and early 90s, almost all major translations underwent major revision. Consider, if you were to go buy a Bible, why would you want to obtain the latest form of a particular edition? The English Bible that many biblical scholars like Brown use most is the Revised Standard Version, or RSV. While it has difficulties, being a revision of the KJV or King James Version, and unfortunately at times slavishly following the occasional bad instincts of the King James Version, it is for the most part both readable and carefully literal. One annoying factor for Catholics may be the use of archaic thou and thee and thine when the text has characters speaking to God. But that was changed in the NRSV of 1990, the New Revised Standard Version. By far that is the Bible mainline Protestants use most, although often conservative Protestants still prefer the KJV. Catholics in the United States are very familiar with the NAB, the New American Bible. Almost always that's what we hear read at Mass. The Old Testament of that translation is excellent, and for the most part, better than the RSV. The original New Testament part of the New American Bible translation, however, was seriously defective, in part, especially for the Gospels, because it had been heavily rephrased after it left the hands of the original translators. Some bad choices got made. For example, rendering the kingdom of God by the reign of God. Besides the problem of the accuracy of such a rendition, which clearly does not fit some gospel passages, which actually are describing a place, a kingdom, rather than an action, a ruling, there was also the factor of comprehension. Parish audiences often heard rain like raindrops falling on the head, instead of rain like ruling rain. Because ruling reign isn't really heard that much in our culture. It's a rarely used term. So it wasn't familiar. And there was also the problem of gender-inclusive language, which we'll get to in a moment. But anyway, this issue with kingdom being paraphrased as reign really is no longer relevant. The New Testament in the NAB was totally redone in the late 1980s and was reintroduced into the liturgy in the early 1990s. Now we have the New American Bible Revised Edition. British Catholics used the Jerusalem Bible in the liturgy, and this translation has had an ecumenical appeal. In its first English edition, the translation had many defects, since the English had largely been rendered from the French, sometimes without sufficient attempt to go back to the original languages, Hebrew and Greek. The French being thought of as a more accurate translation. Again, however, that judgment is now out of date in the light of solid revision done to the Jerusalem Bible in the 1980s. The informative footnotes of the Jerusalem Bible were, however, very valuable and indeed have even been improved in the New Jerusalem Bible. One huge problem mentioned earlier that is common with the New Revised Standard Version, the New American Bible, and the New American Bible Revised Edition is mistranslation, particularly in all cases of gender-inclusive language. For example, rendering the Greek adelphoi, brothers, as the culturally impossible brothers and sisters. You hear this when the second reading is read a lot. Paul is read, brothers and sisters. While this mistranslation makes many Americans feel good, it is alien to the culture, thought, beliefs, and practice of the ancient writers, our ancient biblical ancestors in the faith. And therefore, it damages the text. We're going to talk about this even more later. Look, no translation is perfect. None of them can be completely literal or 100% identical to the original text. And there is no best translation. All of them have some advantages, and all of them have some drawbacks, some more than others. In general, however, the most recent translations, those after the 1980s, are better than the older ones, especially better than the King James Version or the Douay-Rheims, which are both about 400 years old. The reason for this is really twofold. The first reason why is that the English language evolves and has changed significantly since Shakespearean times. The second reason, more importantly, is because of the ancient biblical manuscripts that have been unearthed in the last 50 to 150 years. They're much older and thus closer to the original manuscripts than the ones that we have had available for the use of translators in previous centuries. So those who translated the KJV and the Douay-Rheims didn't have access to these earlier manuscripts. Now, what about popular translations? Scholars, when not reading in the ancient languages, enjoy reading many of the freer translations, especially when those who made them were adept in the choices that remove the obscurity of the original. Scholars like Father Brown insist that a free translation has, in a sense, a commentary built into the translation. When Father Brown was in seminary, the Short Bible, with the New Testament done by E.J. Godspeed, was very popular. And it remains to this day a very useful Bible for personal reading. Today's English version, the Good News Bible, is still very popular today and a highly intelligible version. And that might bring us to ask the question, are there any popular translations that are bad and should be avoided? Well, there is one free translation that Father Brown and other scholars cannot recommend, the Living Bible, which is professedly a paraphrase, a restatement of the author's thought using different words than he did. The paraphrase aspect, however, is not the only or biggest problem of the Living Bible. The real issue is the rigid, ultra-conservative evangelical tone that at times, in Brown's and other scholars' judgments, produces mistranslations and confusion. You can detect these problems when you look at the Living Bible and you turn to the first page of the Gospel according to John, and carefully look at the rendering of its first verse, which it has. In the beginning was Christ. Well, John chapter 1, verse 1 in Greek reads, En arche en ho logos. In the beginning was the Logos. In the beginning was the Word. If it actually said in the beginning was Christ, it would be En arche en Christos. But that's not what the actual Greek has in our best Greek manuscripts. In fact, none of the manuscripts say in the beginning was Christ. All of them say in the beginning was the Word. En arche en ho logos, kai ho logos en proston theon, kai theos en ho logos. In the beginning was the Word was turned toward God, and what God was, the Word also was. The original Greek is literally translated, in the beginning was the Word. So this is a problem. It's not in the beginning was Christ. Since Christ is a designation for the word incarnate, it is theologically inaccurate to say, in the beginning was Christ. Christ came to be when the Word became flesh. So such a paraphrase, in the beginning was Christ, goes beyond translation into injudicious substitution. Now, the Catholics watching this might be asking, some of the Bibles we have been talking about are Protestant Bibles. Aren't we Catholics forbidden to read Protestant Bibles? Father Raymond Brown says, we must make distinctions. We have to distinguish between the earlier Catholic position and the more recent position. Catholic theology develops. So let's look at the historical context. The Bible was a subject of great debate between the Reformers and the theologians at the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563. In the Catholic judgment at the time, the vernacular translations, meaning the translations into the various national languages done by the Reformers were often slanted to favor Protestant theological positions. Consequently, the Council of Trent insisted that in public reading, sermons, and explanations, the Latin Vulgate Bible, used in the church for so many hundreds of years, should be continued to be employed. The practical effect of this was that Catholic translations of the Bible were based on the Latin Vulgate, whereas Protestant translations of the Bible were done from the original languages. Moreover, the Catholic Church wanted the footnotes to respect both its teachings with regard to faith and morals and the interpretations of the Church Fathers. One Protestant translation of the 1500s, the Geneva Bible, had clearly anti-Catholic notes, but the King James Version was not accompanied by footnotes. Accordingly, Catholics were instructed not to read Protestant Bibles unless they be subtly indoctrinated against their own Catholic faith. So went the thinking. On the other side, certainly Protestants did not read Catholic Bibles, in part because of the supposition that these Bibles were inaccurate and contained Catholic teaching in disguise. So went their thinking. All of this has changed, folks. Beginning in the 1950s, Catholic translations, even those used in public reading and sermons, have been from the original languages. For instance, this is true of the New American Bible, the New American Bible Revised Edition, and the New Jerusalem Bible mentioned earlier. The Revised Standard Version has appeared in the Oxford Annotated Bible Edition with footnotes of an informative and non-prejudicial nature, even as most of the footnotes in the New Jerusalem Bible are informative. While there may remain polemicists on both sides of the Catholic-Protestant divide, the Bible is no longer a weapon of warfare between the mainline Protestant churches and the Roman Catholic Church. Catholic scholars have had a part in the latest revision of the Revised Standard Version, and Protestant scholars shared in the latest revision of the New American Bible. You see, both Protestants and Catholics, we are helping each other to understand the Bible now. The Catholic reader is free. He or she can enjoy translations such as the Revised Standard Version, or the New English Bible, or the recent revisions without doctrinal apprehension.